Hi, and welcome to Helping People Perform, the podcast that gives you fascinating insights into those people whose chosen vocation is to help others perform at their best. From consultants to teachers, sports coaches to financial advisors, all of my guests share a passion for getting the most out of individuals, teams, and organisations. Enjoy the episode. So welcome everybody to another episode of the Helping People Perform podcast. I'm delighted today to be joined by Georgie Rudd from Rudd Consulting and the Think Perspective. Georgie, welcome along.
Thanks so much, Paul. Really pleased to be here to have a chat today.
Yeah, looking forward to it. So Georgie is the co-founder of the Think Perspective. She's also an executive coach. She does one-to-one coaching, both with executive coaching and with parental coaching. So with people coming back to work in particular from parental leave. I'm really interested to hear that angle. But also does a lot of group work, group facilitation and coaching, and got something called listening labs. And again, something I'd like to delve into a little bit as we go along. But before we do that, I was hoping you could just give me a little bit of background to you in terms of your experiences, what's got you to where you are today.
Thanks. Yeah, well, when I think back, there has actually been a fairly clear pathway to get to being in this position, running my coaching practice. But at the time, you're not always sure how you get there. And my reflections are, started life at Lloyds Banking Group as a graduate on the graduate programme. And my first job was being an HR business partner there. And I was paired up with some pretty senior directors around the business, working on all sorts of elements of a people plan, from restructuring departments to trade union negotiations through to performance rounds and bonus rounds. And it was a brilliant broad brush on all the levers that you pull to help organisations and people perform. But the bit that I always loved was whenever we were working on the development of the people in that team or that department. So I then kind of switched into a more specialist track where I ran graduate programs at Lloyds for a while in the corporate bank and financial markets areas. I then moved into kind of management development in some different divisions. So trying to kind of, I suppose, see what happens once those graduates leave the program and become more senior. How do you develop managers? And then finally landed in executive development. So we were looking after the top 500 leaders at Lloyds. So really kind of thinking about how do you create self-awareness with pretty senior established leaders? How do you help them to be better? And when I look back, the critical point there was, Lloyds acquired HBOS back in the kind of days of the financial crisis, and it was a complete reset. And I think I really got to see exec development, at its most raw. All the networks got broken, two different cultures coming together. How do you help that leadership team connect and build confidence through a really rocky period? So I loved that work. And from there, I guess that gave me what I needed to go to a whole new blank piece of paper. And I joined Baringa Partners, which is a management consultancy. And there I was head of learning, and there was no L&D department. So I suppose when I look at that, the creativity of that role was brilliant. Brought all the learning of being in a big place and seeing how the cogs fit, to then starting from scratch and thinking, what do we need here? Right. So lots of development programs, lots of curriculum, lots of technology, and lots of risks actually, to try a few new things and have a bit of fun. So loved that, but it was the one-to-one conversations and the coaching that I always loved the most, and it had to be side of desk. Right. Hence the shift to coaching and to do more of what I love all the time.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. And I mean, that wonderful experience of, and I've experienced both of these setups as well, where you're in a really large outfit and you get to experience that broad brush approach, as you said, and just a wide range of generalized, in your case, sort of HR business partner world, and then going into a smaller outfit where you've got that creativity, you've got the opportunity to innovate and move forward, but it's all on you. So how was that experience for you, moving from that big picture to a smaller fish in a bigger pond to a bigger fish in a smaller pond?
Yeah, I mean, you're spot on. It is chalk and cheese. And so there's a little bit of grieving for what you've lost, as in, if I needed help on something really specific, there was a whole team of people you could just go to and ask, and they knew everything about it. Whereas you're right, when it's just you, that's the excitement, and that's also, if you like, some of the pressure of, this is a growing consultancy. When I joined, about 300 people, but now I think they're about 1,500 to 2,000. So
Wow.
really lots of growth, which in itself was fascinating to be a part of. But I think it's just learning to ask more, to be willing to share, to be vulnerable, and to realize how resourceful you are, and to just try, iterate much more quickly. I think in a big firm, there's so much hierarchy, and things sort of go up the chain, don't they? You write a paper and it goes up to the board and it has 15 iterations, and then something might happen. Whereas it was much more agile and really good to iterate and fail fast and try again. And I found that really liberating. I learned a lot, but also it meant we did new things quickly. And when I look back, I suppose that was probably one of the highlights of that corporate part of my career. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, awesome stuff. And so you went from being that big fish, smaller fish in a bigger pond, the big fish in the small pond, to your own fish in your own pond, your own consultancy, and you went out on your own. How long have you been practicing out on your own now?
I love the fish analogy. Yeah, I am. I'm in my own practice, as you say, and I've been doing that for 2 years now. And I took the step. I retrained and got accredited as a coach at Henley Business School, and it took a while. Like, it was a long plan in a way. But having made the leap, it's been interesting to feel and to realise that I thought I wanted to focus exclusively on one-to-one coaching,
Right.
because I'd been in an environment that was pretty busy and doing lots of group work. But I've subsequently realised I did miss that a little bit.
Okay.
So it's been good to build out again with, as you were talking about, some of this kind of listening lab piece, working with groups again.
Right.
Balance, to get the balance really between working with individuals and working with teams. And as you are alluding to, running your own practice, you are the only fish to start with. So you do need to draw on that resourcefulness, and to get the networks to help, to ask and to learn from others. And to be prepared to go and take some risks,
Yep.
and to try some new things, and to try and enjoy that.
Yeah. Oh. We're going to come back to a little bit of that in a short while, but I just wanted to pick. You've got 3 areas that you really focus on, if I'm correct. You've got the one-on-one exec coaching, you've got the one-on-one parental coaching, and you've got the more group facilitation and group work, where you talk about the listening labs. Can we walk through each of those in terms of what you do, who do you work with, and how do you help? Let's start with that one-on-one exec coaching piece. Who do you work with? How do you help them?
Yeah. Well, majority of the coaching work is leaders and managers in organisations of all different sizes and different sectors. And the recurring theme is, for whatever reason, you've got lots of potential there, but that person needs to do some work really to really unlock that potential.
Right.
So there's quite a bit around people who are perhaps at the promotion point, where the organisation backs them and can see they've got bags of potential, but for whatever reason, actually for some really good reasons sometimes, that person is holding themselves back. And that's massive. There's so much we could explore in that space. For others, it's more about they are successful at level, but need to be better, to perform better actually, or to perform differently. And that might be helping increase self-awareness of their impact on others, and understanding, what is it like to be on the receiving end of me? And how is that helping me or hindering me from motivating the team, getting the best out of the team, from building brilliant client relationships? So that can be all sorts of things around managing boundaries, communication, emotional intelligence. It can be dealing with the inner critic, that inner perfectionist that's constantly driving you on, and actually stopping you sometimes from working in a different way that would have a better result.
And that imposter syndrome and everything that comes with it.
Absolutely, yes. And it's fascinating to see, it is absolutely, a human thing. It's odd to call it a syndrome because it sounds like an illness. Perhaps, a way to describe it is it's self-doubt. And I think to different degrees, most people would recognize elements of that, but
Mm.
for some people that inner critic is a really loud voice,
Right.
for others it's quieter. But environmentally, we're going through huge amounts of turmoil over the last couple of years or so.
Mm.
So people can find some of those thinking traps are more prevalent than they used to be. So
Mm.
how do we get to more effective thinking more quickly?
Right. And through your coaching, you're helping people firstly to notice that stuff and then to address it and overcome it. Is that the kind of approach that you're taking?
Yeah, I would say, my reason for being in business is to help create clarity and insight for people.
Right.
And we very rarely get any thinking time. And if we do, it might be quite poor quality. We are time poor, we're under pressure.
Yeah.
So I adopt, if you like, Nancy Klein's perspective on this, who I sort of heartily commend to anybody who's interested in coaching, which is to be a thinking partner. And that is to say, we're equals. This isn't mentoring, and I
Yeah.
don't have all the answers. This individual's really resourceful, but what I do is bring a sort of high quality thinking environment, which means lots of listening, hopefully some really provocative questions, and our aim is to create some awareness of
Right.
what is going on, which then enables us to build strategies to do things differently. Very often we don't have time to stop and think
Mm.
about what's going on. We're just in a feeling or in a mode,
Right.
and it's a default mode.
Mm. Oh, it's amazing the power of reflection. I've noticed it throughout a lot of the work that I've done, but I've also seen it in people in that a lot of the even events that you go to a speaking event or something like that, the number of people who've come out of those events, and you hear the chatter, and it's not about necessarily the talk or the individual who's been speaking, although they generally find one or two insights from them. A huge amount of value of just simply the time to not be in that day-to-day grind and to speak to others, to speak to colleagues, to speak to new people and new perspectives, just to allow your brain to refilter that stuff and up your performance that way.
Yeah, I think the power of reflection is sort of woefully underestimated, and especially when we're thinking about how do we empower and equip the people that work with us and for us to do great thinking as well.
Mm.
So I think you're right. There's a huge amount which is just kind of almost learning about what's going on for us, and challenging the assumptions that we're operating on, because we all, we are efficient beings. We've got shortcuts for good reasons.
Yeah.
And we very often operate on the basis of some assumptions which sound like truths when we say it to ourselves. But
Right.
if you get some challenge and an alternative perspective, maybe we realize that is an assumption that's probably not true.
Right.
But you could be basing your whole strategy
Mm.
around those assumptions.
And you say you also do one-on-one work with parental coaching and people coming back from parental leave. You know, it's a topic that I've touched on with a few people in my day. I've been through that process myself. How do you help people? Who's it you help in that space?
Yeah, I mean, as a working parent, also I have huge empathy for, it's a series of bumpy transitions
Mm.
being a working parent, and often I'm working within organisations, to help those who have been out on parental leave to transition back in as smoothly as they can.
Mm.
But I'm also interested in the fact that, parenting's a marathon, it goes on for years. So we're quite rightly investing in new parents getting through that, really incredible change
Yeah.
in life and circumstance. But the bumpy transitions continue, as
Mm.
children start school, as you start to then start secondary school, have teenagers. So parents are probably the most time poor people I know. And actually, there's a huge amount of noise out there about what we should be doing, and how we should be parenting. So again, it's about creating a space for high quality thinking where
Right.
people are really getting to know what it is that they do think, what they
Mm.
need to do differently, what assumptions they're making. And so I love the work with parents coming back. It's often, understandably, about confidence, having been out of the workplace for up to a year,
Mm.
working differently. So in
Mm.
the past, we could throw time at the problem. Most people were happy to kind of work late, particularly
Yep.
in consulting. But now there are some different boundaries. So how will we say no? What will we say no to?
Right.
And most of that's around ourselves.
Mm.
What are we telling ourselves about that? rather than organisations necessarily expecting people to say yes to everything. It's more kind of managing ourselves. And then there's, you know, being smart about career and thinking through, well, where am I going? What's my plan? And not losing momentum.
Right. Oh, wonderful stuff. I mean, it's definitely a subject close to my heart, shall we say, with two parents and just starting two different kids in two different schools and managing just the logistics and getting used to new schools and bits and pieces like that. It has an effect on your whole family dynamic, not just the work aspect as well, doesn't it?
It really does. And I think it can sometimes take us a bit by surprise.
Mm.
But there's something about being in that role where you're helping others, you know, children, to manage their own transitions whilst recognizing you've got an awful lot going on for you. And it's like ripples, isn't it? You know, it's a system of people going through change. And in order to be as effective as we want to be the parents we want to be, sometimes we've got to stop and think about what are we doing to help ourselves get through this quickly and effectively.
Oh, wonderful. And the last bit, the sort of group work, and particularly interested in this listening labs piece. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah, I am absolutely passionate about the topic of listening, and this comes from, I suppose, my 20 years in the corporate world, but also my job as an executive coach. And listening is, you know, probably the most important tool in the toolkit if you're going to be a coach.
Right.
But my reflection on this is the quality of listening in everyday life in organisations is relatively poor,
Right.
and I can see the knock-on of those poor interactions. And you know, if we stop and think about this for ourselves for a minute, you know, if I asked you to think about an experience you've had in the past of not being listened to or having a poor experience of being listened to, most of us can think of that relatively quickly. We can start to remember how it made us feel, and the likelihood is it stayed with us quite a long time. We probably ruminated on it. It wasn't the work of a moment. And for some of us, you know, that can lead to us deciding to withdraw our intellectual capital, our motivation and engagement, to withdraw our ideas and our innovation. So the cost for organisations, I think, is a lot greater than perhaps we actually realise. Listening is at the heart of solving some of the biggest organisational problems that I hear HR directors, heads of learning and business leaders talk about. You know, when it comes to hybrid working, inclusion, how do we make sure these diverse teams that we've invested in building are actually being heard? There's a piece around strategy development in organisations where we're working in silos, where we're not asking the right questions and we're not listening. So that development of strategy can be disjointed. So the premise of Listening Lab is that this isn't, you know, unachievable. Listening is a skill that can be learnt. And when you pair knowing how to bring attention and listening with asking some better questions, there are just some really powerful incremental changes that transform the quality of conversation and consequently results for business. And I think most of us have not been taught how to listen. Right. It's not on the curriculum at school. Some of us are predisposed to listen, you know, pretty well. Others, it's more difficult. But actually, with some small changes, we can all just make a little notch on the dial of listening and flex that muscle. And it could even be just 20% more than it is today. And just to notice what's the impact on the team, on my reports, on my clients, on the people who are above me in the hierarchy. So I've got a business partner called Heather. We run Think Perspective, and we're kind of laser focused on helping everyday leaders learn how to listen in the moment at work better.
Fantastic. And as you say, it's one of those skills where you could just say, "Oh, I'm always listening." It's like I'm always breathing, and therefore, why would I need to improve on it? But you've touched on some really valuable underlying bottom line business reasons to actually go about and improve that listening. So these listening labs, they tend to be group sessions, is that right? And you do workshops to help people recognize what good listening is, or how does that they tend to work?
Yeah, absolutely. So they are collective experiences, and the Listening Lab is based on the idea we're just running a series of experiments So we want to get away from this idea of, if you like, training,
Right.
and having lots of slides and information, but to create an experience where people are in situations from which they can learn, try something new, see how that goes, try it again. So there's a piece that we ask people to look at before they come, which is a bit of reflection. There's some clips, some kind of food for thoughts. And there are 2 really low key experiments we say you can do in the flow of your day to day. You don't have to do anything differently. Go about your working life, or even a conversation at home, and just try this one thing and see what happens.
Right.
We get together in a workshop, we build on that, we do more experiments. There's demos, there's practice, lots of kind of group experience and smaller group work. And then we have kind of a regroup later where we have some post experiments and we look at how those go. And we try to balance doing some stuff, if we can, face to face, with deliberately the regroup being online, because most of us are listening in the online environment for at least part of our day. So what changes do you make to listen well, on a Teams call versus around the table in the office?
Right.
So yeah, listening lab, what I love is seeing people come in and quite understandably having a bit of a degree of cynicism about, it's another course, is it really going to make a difference? And seeing those light bulbs go off, and people thinking about the impact they have, how the small things they learn have a really big impact. And the other challenge we sometimes get is, I'm so busy, I don't have time to listen. Like, listening takes too much time. And to tell people what to do. And there's a real kind of flip around how we add value, because I think we are pre-programmed, myself included, if you think back to school and work, to add value by contributing, by talking and advising and knowing the answers. And actually, the way that managers used to operate in a hierarchy, you'd look up and think, well, that person will know. But we are networked organisations now. Information is flowing freely around organisations, and you only really get to capitalise on that if you can listen and be curious. So there's a real sense of people learning that they can make a big difference, even in 10 minutes, if they just flip the way they start the conversation. And we look at simple stuff, to fight your default mode and just try these 2 or 3 things. Give it 5 minutes and then see what happens. And people generally sort of coming out saying, I'd never noticed. Right. And that listening is not binary, as you say. It's actually, there's 5 or 6 levels of it.
And what I love is the approach to experimentation, actually learning from the experience and the group experience. That's a huge value add in itself, isn't it? Because if people learn by themselves, they only learn an element of it. And if you're learning as a group, one, you get to experience it, you get to build that team along with it, but you also get something real that people can reflect back on and add layers of value that you just wouldn't get as an individual.
Yeah, I love that point. You're right, there's a sense of collective reflection and learning. And one of our reflections, because in some ways we've been experimenting with Listening Lab to understand, where it works and where it goes. One of our learnings is we hadn't intended for it to be an intact team activity necessarily. But a lot of the work we're doing is not. It's a group of people within the same organisation. But when you do have an intact team, it's the group that's leaving telling us, if you'd called this team building, we wouldn't have got the same out of it maybe. But that's what it has been, because we spent a whole day having really high quality conversations where our listening is far from in the kind of low level pretending, ignoring, selecting. And we are deliberately asking more questions. We're getting curious. And so people are leaving feeling a sense of connectedness as a team. Trust is exponentially higher. And commitment to kind of work together on it going forward is clearly also there. So it's really interesting to see.
Oh, wonderful. It must be an amazing experience for the teams that go through it. Quite jealous on that front. Might try to get the opportunity to do that at some point in the future. So just moving the conversation along a little bit from the podcast, we usually at this point we'll ask people about their own performance. So how do you help Georgie perform? What angles have you got? Particularly being as we often call it, and this may nudge you in a certain direction, but a solopreneur. Those people who are working by themselves, have their own practice. Where do you go for your own performance uplift?
Yeah, I love that question. And it's a great one for anybody who is working on their own to be reflecting on. And for me, there are a couple of main sources. One would be, as a coach, I have supervision, and this is coaching for me as a coach, and it is invaluable, both from a kind of ethics perspective, but also for me to be experiencing and observing and learning from another professional coach, but also to be benefiting from the clarity of reflection and thought that I'm hoping to help others with. So investing in that for myself is very important to me and to my professional integrity. But you reference solopreneurs, and that's exactly right. Having a network of people, a wide network of people who are both in different walks of life, but also in the same boat as you, hear the journey they're on, what's going well, what's difficult, to realize you're not alone, to hear new ideas, to be able to help other people by sharing yours is a very key part, I think, of how I'm developing myself. And the other thing is, and I love talking to clients about this, is thinking about who you need to recruit into your network. So most of us need a certain kind of group of people that might include, for example, the cheerleader. And if you haven't got one, well, you need to recruit one into your network. Who's the person who will give you that positive alternative perspective? The other for me is the voice of reason or logic. So who's my go-to, phone a friend if for whatever reason I've got a dip, something's triggered me. Who is it who's going to just put forward the logical kind of alternative perspective? And those two for me have been particularly important to say, have I got the right people there on my speed dial, and to make sure that I do actually go and talk to them.
Right. Just making some notes on there, some things I really want to work on for myself. And just for clarity, if people are listening just to this episode, with the solopreneurs piece that we're talking about is a network that from episode number 1, Mr. Faris Aranki, who is a friend of both of ours from way back, he set that up as a sort of informal network of people who are on their own or in very small teams, and just connected in a way that we're all facing similar challenges. There's all sorts of people from coaches, accountants, various different walks of life, who are going out on their own and experiencing this world of, I'm setting up a practice or a small group, and where do I go for that support? And I think that informal network has been hugely valuable for myself, and I'm hearing that from yourself, Georgie.
Yeah, I think we could easily overlook some of the, as you were kind of touching on with Listening Lab, this kind of collective learning. We can overlook the power of that. We maybe think we need certain things, but my reflection on the solopreneurs group that we're talking about is some of it is content led. What are other people doing? How can I kind of learn from that? There's a huge amount that's about emotional kind of moral support, which is to say, this is natural experience of a business life cycle. And feeling that you are, not alone, but also sharing ways to overcome some of those challenges.
Oh, wonderful. So I'm just going to go into a couple of quick fire questions. First one is about your sort of ideal client or ideal person, organization, group that you would really like to work with, and you think could really benefit from the experience and expertise that you have. So who would that ideal client be for you that you would like to help perform?
Well, on one level, my ideal client is pretty much any of the everyday heroes and heroines who are in organizations who may not be anywhere near the top of the tree, but have a massively important role to play in motivating everyday people, teams. So getting people, my ideal experience is to be a fly on the wall in the team meeting or the one-to-ones, and just to spot where with some small changes listening could be better quality, and the questions could be the kind of questions that help someone else think for themselves better, to provoke and to be creative, rather than some of our kind of our own experiences of being in organizations where conversations are relatively low level, the status updates, there might be some problem solving. So in many ways, anywhere where there's somebody who's in a management role or a leadership role is ideal. but actually for me, I suppose personally, it's really exciting working with companies where there is an embrace of doing things a bit differently. So I suppose whether the willingness to enjoy the idea of experimentation, to kind of think that that might be quite exciting rather than feeling scared about it. But I then reflect again and think that the opportunity is massive with organisations where it seems scary, it seems a million miles away from how we do things.
Mm.
The learning there's so much rich, ripe learning there. So for me, I think it's being in rooms where I can help people increase their awareness of what they're doing and how they can change it.
Yeah, it's a wonderful feeling when you get, you mentioned it before, those sort of aha moments, those little light bulbs where people, purely because of a question you've asked or a prompt that you've given or something that you've done, gets them to think differently about things. And that is the essence for me about helping people perform. It's not giving them the answers as such. It's about enlightening them, or getting them to, even better, to enlighten themselves just through some reflection, some space, some questions that make a huge difference.
Yeah, and my second thought on that, sorry that you sparked another thought.
Go for it.
Yeah, you're clearly sharing some really good reflections as well. Schools,
Right.
it's not an area of business I'm particularly focused in, but the opportunity for children and teachers actually, but for children to learn how to listen earlier on is very exciting, to see how we equip them to know those skills. It's not something that we're teaching effectively in schools right now.
Yeah,
it sparked a thought for me there, and it is an area that I'd be very excited to think about more.
Yeah. So if there's anybody out there in that environment thinks they might benefit from Georgie's expertise, and do reach out, I'd say, or on your behalf anyway. Please don't let me speak for you on that front. But the other side of this, in terms of helping you perform, so if you were to have an opportunity to sit down with any individual, any group, any organization that you think actually just a conversation with those people would really help me in my own game and up my own performance, who might that be?
Well, podcasts actually are a brilliant way for having access to lots of people, almost as if you'd invited them round for dinner and they were sitting around your table and learning from them. And there are a number of podcasts that would be my go-to, and I'm delighted you're beginning this. But if you think about the guests on the Diary of a CEO podcast, for example,
Yeah,
I get masses from all these different walks of life, hearing people reflecting on what they've learned in their lives, what they do differently, and their areas of expertise. So there's a huge amount there. But I think the other thing, which sounds a bit left field, is I love writing.
okay.
I love writing as part of the work I do. And I would absolutely love to meet particularly one or two of the children's authors that I admire, on how they create compelling stories at a level which is very easy to understand. And so I'd pick Emma Carroll or Catherine Rundle. These are books my daughters enjoy. And I would love to learn from them about how they go about the writing process and to create, as I say, really exciting narrative in a way that's easily accessible, because there is a huge amount I can apply to the way I'd like to communicate with adults in the business world.
Yeah, that ability to communicate in the more concise manner. I'm sorry this letter is so long, I didn't have time to write you a short one. that kind of approach, which is, it does take that ability to bring the complex and make it concise, can be hugely valuable, purely in helping people to understand at those basic levels as to what are the principles behind what you're doing, and then you can build on that. Yeah. Oh, wonderful. And absolute pleasure talking with you, Georgie. But before we close things out properly, how do people reach out if they want to find out more, if they want to get in contact with you? How do people make contact with you, or have you got any websites or anything that people should be visiting to find out more?
Yeah, thank you. So the best place to find me is probably LinkedIn. You'll find me there as Georgie Rudd of Rudd Coaching, but also Think Perspective, which is my collaboration with my business partner. On our websites, for me, it's ruddcoaching.co.uk, and Think Perspective is thinkperspective.com.
Yeah.
So those are great places to start, and I'm more than happy to connect and have a conversation with anybody who's thinking about how they can learn to listen and to think better.
Wonderful. And I'll make sure those links are all in the show notes so that everybody has the opportunity to follow those through. Well, Georgie, an amazing conversation. I've got a few notes down here for myself that I want to work on and up my own performance off the back of this. So it's been hugely valuable for me. Hope it's been enjoyable for you and for the listeners. And once again, thanks for being with us today, Georgie.
Thank you so much. I have really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you liked what you heard, then please give the podcast a rate, review and share. I'm Paul Teasdale, and from sausage making to banking, oil and gas to Formula One, I help people perform. If you'd like to find out more and have a conversation, contact me via helpingpeopleperform.com.